They were farmers, lawyers, printers, and merchants. They weren't warriors, they weren't kings, but they made a decision to band together and to lead. They didn't have perfect plans, they didn't have the benefit of certainty, but they had each other. They had conviction, and they had the courage to stake their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on an idea. They came together and built a nation. What are you building? Welcome to the Everyday Diplomat, where we talk about how real leaders build trust, lead with clarity, and solve problems without relying on rank or authority. I'm Michael Forrest, a retired Marine Sergeant Major, former U.S. diplomat, and someone who spent the better part of 20 years leading high-performing teams through crisis, conflict, and constant change. I've stepped into commands where morale was broken, where trust had all but vanished, and where people were physically present but emotionally checked out. And I didn't have time to give speeches. I had to lead in a way that actually pulled people back in. Not with pressure, not with gimmicks, but with actual presence, with principle and purpose. This episode isn't just a history lesson. It's a challenge because the men who built this country, they weren't superhuman. They were deliberate. They were disciplined. They were leaders. And in a world that's full of noise, distraction, and absolute division, we need that type of leadership now more than ever. Let's get into it. George Washington didn't just win a war. He won trust, not by demanding it, but by embodying it. In a time when power often corrupted, Washington stood apart. He didn't grasp for authority. He walked away from it. Twice, in fact. After leading the Continental Army to victory, he could have become the next king, and the troops, they would have followed him. Many even expected it, but Washington completely shocked the world, and he resigned his commission and returned to civilian life. That single act was so powerful that King George III is rumored to have said that if he does this, he will go down in history as the greatest man in the world. Washington understood something that many of us forget today, that real leadership is about restraint, not about dominance. It's about character, not your charisma. One of the most powerful examples of this came in 1783 in Newburgh, New York. The war was winding down, and Continental Army officers were incredibly frustrated by unpaid wages and broken promises, and they began to consider a mutiny. Rumors began to swirl of a military takeover. Washington went ahead and called a meeting. He walked into the room, completely uninvited, and addressed the officers directly. He spoke not as a general, but as a peer. Then, while reading a letter from a congressman, he paused. He reached into his coat, and he pulled out a pair of reading spectacles, and he said, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray, but I am almost blind in the service of my country." That simple moment, the humanity, the sacrifice, the quiet vulnerability, it brought hardened men to tears. The mutiny dissolved. Washington didn't shame them. He didn't threaten them. He simply reminded them of what he'd helped them build together, of what they were protecting. This moment is a masterclass in leadership through humility. And it's one that I've drawn from countless times myself. Whether I'm putting in my hearing aids in front of my team without shame or sharing the burdens that I've carried in service. If you're in a leadership role right now, today, go ahead and ask yourself, are you trusted because of your rank or because of your reputation? Washington proved that the first fades, but the second endures. Thomas Jefferson was not a battlefield general. He didn't lead armies. He led with ideas. And those ideas, they didn't just change a country, they helped reshape a world. When Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence, he wasn't writing poetry. He was crafting a mission statement for a revolution. A set of principles that were so bold, so untested, they bordered on the unthinkable. That all men were created equal, that the power should flow up from the people and not down from the crown. That liberty wasn't a privilege reserved just for the elite. It was a right that was endowed by our Creator. Those weren't just words. They were a stake in the ground. Jefferson understood that leadership actually requires vision, not vague ambition, but clearly defined purpose. And purpose requires language because people don't follow tasks, they follow meaning. Jefferson gave the revolution its why, and great leaders today still do the same. They don't lead with to-do lists, they lead with belief. They make the abstract feel tangible. They give the mission an actual heartbeat. When I lead teams, especially in high stress or high ambiguity environments, the first question that I ask isn't, what do we need to get done? It's, why does this even matter? That question changes everything, and your team is going to love you for it. Jefferson's clarity became our compass. And while, like all, he was far from perfect, and we should never glass over the contradictions between his ideals and the reality, his visions pushed us forward. As a leader, you may never write a declaration that leads to the formation of a new nation, but every meeting, every memo, every mission brief carries your voice. And go ahead and ask yourself, are you just communicating or are you casting a vision? Because in the end, people are not going to remember what you told them to do, but they're going to remember why it mattered. So, if Washington was the steady hand and Jefferson was the visionary, then John Adams was the voice of conscience. Adams wasn't the most popular of our founders. He didn't charm the crowds and he didn't sugarcoat the truth. But when the stakes were the highest, he told the truth anyways. He defended principles, not popularity, and that's what made him indispensable. One of Adams' boldest and absolutely least appreciated acts came in 1770 after the Boston Massacre. British soldiers had fired into the crowd, killing Crispus Attucks and 4 other colonists, marking the first American casualties of the Revolutionary War. The colonies were absolutely furious. The city was on edge, and emotions were completely boiling over. And John Adams, a patriot, a critic of British rule, he did the unthinkable. He agreed to defend the British soldiers in court. Why? Because he believed in justice, the purity of the process, because he believed that principles must come before passion. He stood in front of an incredibly hostile jury, and he argued that law, not anger, must guide our new nation that we were trying to become. He later wrote that facts are stubborn things. That phrase is now a meme, and it wasn't a punchline, it was a reminder. Leadership means having the courage to say those hard things, even when nobody wants to hear it. In today's world of social media echo chambers and outrage-driven decisions, Adams' example is an absolute gut check. Do you lead to be liked or do you lead to be honest? Because the people that we remember are not the ones who always won every argument, but they are the ones who had the moral courage to stand firm in storms of doubt. If your team is facing pressures, internal or external, don't just tell them what they want to hear. Tell them what they need to, and do it with the same clarity and conviction that Adams did. Because in the long run, people don't follow the loudest voice in the room, but they do follow the one that they trust when it matters the most. The founding fathers didn't lead with guesswork. They led with principle, with clarity, with the courage to define the future before anybody else could see it. That's what modern leadership demands too. If you found yourself promoted but unprepared, if you're navigating conflict, confusion, or a team that maybe just can't seem to click, you don't need more noise. You need a foundation. That's why I built the Foundations course. It's a practical, battle-tested roadmap to help you set the tone, to build trust fast, and then lead high-performing teams without barking orders or losing yourself in micromanagement. The launch coupon code should be popping up on the screen right about now. And at the time of this video's publishing, it's only available until the end of this week. Take the first step forward towards principled leadership. Visit everydaydiplomat.com and begin today. Long before he ever became a revolutionary, Benjamin Franklin tried to actually stop the war from happening at all. For over a decade, he served as a diplomat in London, arguing for moderation, pushing back against the growing hostility, trying to bridge the divide between the colonies and the crown. But eventually he saw that reconciliation was impossible, so he returned home, disillusioned and prepared for a new fight. And soon after, he'd set sail once again. This time not to make peace with Britain, but to secure an alliance with France. He wasn't young, he wasn't flashy, he wasn't even formally trained in statecraft, but he understood people, and that made all the difference. Franklin knew how to listen before speaking, how to read the room, and how to use charm and wit without losing credibility. He gave us the blueprint for diplomatic leadership. Know what you want, understand what they need, and then find the bridge between those two. This wasn't just politics, it was persuasion with purpose. He reminded us that the pen and the handshake can shape nations just as much as the sword. Franklin's diplomacy wasn't just international. He was also a master at leading people by lowering their defenses and disarming egos and elevating the conversation. He taught us something that remains vital today. Influence isn't about dominance, it's about connection. As leaders, we often assume that we need to control every single detail, to win every debate, or always have the final word. Franklin showed us a better way because the best leaders, like Franklin, they don't speak to win, they speak to unite. So ask yourself, are you leading from ego or from purpose? Are you fighting to be right or are you working to make it right? The original Diplomat reminds us that leadership isn't about volume, it's about vision, restraint, and a commitment to something bigger than ourselves. Franklin's diplomacy wasn't measured in words, it was measured in outcomes. Because of his influence in France, critical figures were sent to reinforce the Americans fighting for independence. Jean-Baptiste Comte de Rochambeau brought 6,000 troops and a wealth of battlefield experience, working lockstep with George Washington. Marquis de Lafayette, a young French noble, he didn't just serve with distinction, he became a family member to Washington and a strategic bridge between the two nations. The Comte de Grasse, commander of the French fleet, he delivered the naval power that sealed the victory at Yorktown by cutting off the British retreat. These weren't just military reinforcements, they were the fruits of actual diplomacy, of relationships built with care, with patience and absolute resolve. And why was France so eager to help? Because they saw an opportunity to weaken their centuries-old rival, Britain. Franklin understood the full battlefield, not just the ones with the muskets and the cannon fire, but the geopolitical chessboard upon which the world was actually playing. He aligned the American needs with French interests. That's not just diplomacy, that's incredible strategic leadership. In the time of rebellion, Franklin proved that influence could win wars just as surely as any army could. And in today's divided world, his example reminds us that if you want to lead, to really lead, learn to build coalitions, speak to what unites, and earn trust that actually endures. Franklin didn't just help birth a nation, he showed us how diplomacy can actually defend it. If Washington gave us stability and Jefferson gave us ideals, Adams gave us moral courage and Franklin gave us diplomacy, then Alexander Hamilton, he gave us structure. He understood something that few grasped at the time. Liberty, without systems to actually protect it, was nothing more than a slogan. Fresh out of war, America was on the edge of absolute chaos. States printed their own money. Debt threatened to collapse the economy, and factions already fought over power. Hamilton looked at all of that mess and he saw not just problems, but he saw potential. He believed in institutions, in structure, in strategy, and he knew that charisma wouldn't carry the country far. What we needed was order. As the first Secretary of the Treasury, he crafted a financial system that allowed the United States to become an economic power. He established a national bank, consolidated war debt, and created policies that stabilized our young republic. But more than policies, Hamilton gave us precedent. He showed future leaders that structure wasn't the enemy of freedom, it was the foundation of it. Without rules, liberty can turn into recklessness. Without institutions, power becomes personal. And without structure, chaos is going to find a foothold. Hamilton's life was far from perfect. His ambition created enemies. His pride led to his downfall, most famously in his fatal duel with Aaron Burr. The two men had long been political rivals, and when tensions escalated, they met in Weehawken, New Jersey. Hamilton, determined to uphold his honor without taking a life, intentionally fired his shot into the air. Burr, however, returned the fire with striking accuracy, hitting Hamilton right in the abdomen with a fatal shot that would take his life the next morning. Hamilton lost the duel, but he won history. His legacy, unlike Burr's, endures as a cornerstone of America's institutional strength and as a constitutional design. That final chapter of his life, it was dramatic, but it didn't define him. Through every triumph and every flaw, Hamilton never wavered in his belief that the Republic needed a spine, that leadership wasn't just about inspiration, it was about architecture. In every organization, every mission, every moment where we're tempted to just wing it, Hamilton reminds us that lasting impact requires lasting structure. So go ahead and build it, protect it, and don't let today's noise dismantle tomorrow's foundation. Our founding fathers didn't just lead from instinct. They planned, they wrote really well, and they refined and debated because they understood that freedom without direction, they could collapse into chaos. That's why I wrote the book, The Everyday Diplomat, How to Lead with Influence and Achieve Real-World Success, and created the Everyday Diplomat Planner, a 90-day leadership journal for intentional people-first leaders. They're designed for real leaders in real conditions. Tools that help you align your values, track your progress, and lead with clarity in any environment. Because whether you're building a business, leading a team, or guiding a community, leadership without structure is just noise. The book is available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apple Books, and the audiobook is now available on Audible. The planner is available on Amazon in paperback, and the premium spiral-bound desktop version is available exclusively through our print partners at Lulu. All of the links are provided in the description below. Let's get back into it. Our founders didn't have social media, they didn't have AI, they didn't even have indoor plumbing, but what they did have was unwavering principles and the will to act on them. They led with urgency, with clarity, with the belief that their leadership wasn't just for that moment, but for generations. Today, our leadership moments, they don't always come on battlefields. They come in boardrooms, in classrooms, in council meetings, and in every conversation where influence is needed more than authority. We lead teams, we lead families, we lead organizations, and what we do now, how we lead, it will echo just as loudly as theirs. So the question is, what is it that we're building? Are we building systems that outlast us? Are we creating cultures rooted in principle? Are we showing up with courage or convenience? Leadership today isn't about being the loudest voice. It's about being the most grounded one. It's about standing firm when your values get tested. It's about lifting others up without losing your standards. It's about making room at the table while staying anchored in your purpose. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more Washingtons, more Jeffersons, more Adams, Franklins, and Hamiltons. Not because they were perfect, but because they chose to build. Even when the odds were completely stacked against them, even when the costs were incredibly high, even when the future was absolutely uncertain. This week, as we celebrate the 4th of July, remember, patriotism isn't a hashtag, it's a responsibility. And leadership, real leadership, it isn't about just knowing the past, it's about shaping your future. Let's be the type of leaders that they would be proud of. Let's build something that's actually worth inheriting. If you believe in building something that lasts, something principled, people first, and actually worth passing down, this channel is here to help. Hit that subscribe button for weekly videos, leadership insights, and shorts that will keep you sharp between postings. And if you haven't already, go ahead and grab your free leadership guide, 10 Things to Never Say as a Leader. It's linked right in the description below, and it's a quick but powerful read that can really change how your team hears you. Thanks for being here, thanks for building with purpose, and thanks for carrying the legacy forward.